Hey guys, good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. We are back just doing a quick sermon follow-up. Going to try to do 10 questions in 3 minutes, so see how we can do, huh?
Yep. So Troy, what is the context of this last week's sermon?
Yeah, so we have been in John chapter 6, and in that passage, you have the feeding of the 5,000, you have Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm, you have him teaching about all of this, and it all encapsulates at the very end while he's teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum, and people begin to walk away from him.
Yeah, that's hard to hear. That's hard to internalize.
It is.
So then, what is the big idea of this sermon then?
Yeah. So people were struggling. They weren't feeling it. And because of that, they just abandoned ship. And so the big idea is following God is more important than feeling good.
Sure. And there's a verse in there that says, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. What is the importance of that particular verse?
Yeah, well, the disciples are not the 12 disciples, but this crowd of people, thousands who had begun following him. And they began to see that they were after daily bread, and Jesus offered them eternal bread, and it meant a life change, and they couldn't hack it, and so they left.
So that's ultimately why they left Jesus, was that he wasn't supplying exactly what they wanted.
Yeah, they wanted miracles.
Yeah.
They wanted their daily needs met. They wanted the Roman oppression to be taken away. They wanted him to be their Messiah, and he was none of that.
Sure, yeah. And so these people walking away, what can we learn from what happened there?
Yeah, I think what we can learn is that sometimes we ask God to fix a situation,
Yeah.
and he's actually fixing us. And I think that we want the situation to be fixed so badly we lose sight of the fact that there's a bigger issue at hand, and it's our relationship with him.
Yeah, so it's hard when people walk away from you and they leave your cause or whatever you're working on. How did Jesus respond to all that?
Yeah, he actually, after he watched thousands of people walk away from him, he turned around to his 12 disciples and he said, "Are you going to abandon me as well?"
Yeah, that's crazy. And so then the 12 disciples, how did they respond to that particular question? Because that's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, it is a hard one. And, he went to them and he asked them this. I love the fact that he went to them and didn't just ignore the situation.
Sure.
But then the disciples, Simon Peter speaks up, no surprise there. But his response is like, where else would we go? And man, this has touched my heart. When I've been in my lowest places, sometimes I've been like, man, maybe I should just throw up, my hands and walk away. And it's like, where else would I go?
Yeah.
And what a wise response by Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. So why were the disciples specifically able to keep that faith?
Yeah, I think this is almost like a secret sauce here. and here's what it is. The disciples knew Jesus.
Okay.
They had lived with him. They had watched him at work. They had seen his miracles. They had heard his teaching. And so at that very moment, Peter says, where else are we going to go? You have the words of life. You are the Holy One of Israel. And because they knew Jesus, they stuck with him
That
faithfully.
deeper understanding. Sure. Yeah. And so then why does Jesus, in the midst of all of this, that heartfelt moment, in the midst of this awful thing, he just decides to kind of shove the sword in just a little bit deeper, and then brings up one of you is going to betray me. Why does he do that?
That is a hard question, because it's like if it were me and I were hearing the disciples say, "No, Lord, we're with you. We're going to stick with you." I'd be like, "Oh, thank you."
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, "One of you is actually going to betray me." And man, I've thought about that, and I think that Jesus is communicating to them a couple of things. One is, it's going to get worse. Abandonment is one thing.
Yeah. Betrayal
is another.
It is.
And he's like, not only have I been abandoned, but I am going to be betrayed.
Yeah.
And if we're in the thick of it, sometimes we think if God would just fix this, my life would be better. And the truth is, it could actually get worse. And we need to keep that in mind, not out of fear, but just out of respect for what God's doing in our lives, so we're learning through it.
Sure. And so, now that we've kind of taken in some of that, hard to process and hard to come to grips with, what do we have coming up next week?
Yeah, so we have this situation some people are wanting Jesus to move back to Jerusalem and go to this Feast of Booths or Feast of Tabernacles. And Jesus doesn't at first. He ends up going back. But this next week, we're going to talk about the historical significance of the Feast of Booths and what that meant, and what it meant for Jesus, and what it meant for his ministry, and what it meant for his future to the cross and the resurrection.
Very cool. That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Don't forget to join us either here at the church on our live stream. I can't wait, actually. That's going to be exciting to hear.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for jumping in, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. See ya.